Hey everybody, welcome back to Renegade Radio. Want to hop on real quick. First of all, just want to say thank you so much for tuning in to this episode and to just Renegade Radio. As you probably see that we're just moving along. Things are progressing. Finished the episode with a recording with David. You guys are going to love this. I will just say that real quickly that you are going to want to listen to the first part, and I'll make sure I'll link that in the show notes. Listen to the first part because we make reference to a lot of things from the first episode. Especially Swords of Illumination, which is the book that David has written. So we just want to make sure that you're not lost when we start going into the conversation. This is a fun one. This is really great. There's nothing else that I don't think I really need to really warn you about, but make sure you just check out the show notes for the first episode and then also for his book, Swords of Illumination. Guys, enjoy this episode. Thank you for tuning in to Renegade Radio. This is the one podcast that's meant for innovators, disruptors, for square pegs and round holes, for misfits, for rebels, for those of us who just don't like the status quo. This is Renegade Radio, Season 2, Episode 012, featuring David Olcott.
All right, let's start with the book and let's kind of pick up from there.
Good. So Swords of Illumination, of course, was published in September of 23, and we got an overwhelming response. I was, as a writer, you're always worried about putting yourself out there, and stuff like this. And I will tell you, it's one of those things, Dave, you should have trusted the universe, because the universe has come back so strong with so many people from 22 countries. Over 10,000 books have sold so far. What's today's? April 2nd, 10,000. And we're even further than that now. But so many amazing responses from around the world, from people just, hey, it hit me at the right time. I was really looking for something like this. This was a missing part of my life. But one of the key themes that people have said over and over again, who have gone to amazing programs, which I have attended, which I love, with the Joe Dispenzas of the world and the Greg Bradens of the world, the Bruce Liptons of the world, my people, I admire, and I really thank them for the work that they do in this community kind of stuff. Do I agree with everything? No, of course, that's just not the way things work.
Right.
But it's really something I admire about them putting out this word. And even people who have attended those events, what they've come back and said that Swords of Illumination reminded them of a key thing is that they have to apply the knowledge that they've been learning at those other events. And that's what that book is about. We all believe, and we talk about this in the book a lot, that knowledge is power. Okay, there can be a strong argument, and it has been for 100+ years that we've been using that phrase. I will tell you an actual experience that has not been my experience. And that is that when you just have knowledge, the ego just soaks that up and just goes, oh, I need more and more and more. And it's never ending. But when you start applying that information, that's the holy grail. That's the change. That's the power. So knowledge is important, but without application, it doesn't become power. So that's been one of the big themes that people from all over the world have really shared with us is you got to apply the things you're learning. So if you go out there and do a seminar and you really learn something brilliant and you come home and you talk to everybody about it, that's where most knowledge base stops. It's actually, I go to programs now and I don't tell anybody I've gone to the program. I go and I learn, and then I go apply it. I see if it actually works for me, and then how it doesn't work, and then how it doesn't. I investigate some more, and I really thoroughly research the work before I share it with others. And that's a missing component, I think, in our society that is so much based upon that knowledge is power concept.
The notes that I'm writing, this is also something new that I'm testing out to see what this is like, is actively taking notes during the interviews, because I've realized that we've talked about how the brain distorts and discards information. So I want to make sure that I'm not discarding information. What I find interesting about this, and you and I have also talked about this before, that the application of knowledge, which can also be translated as wisdom, I guess, in a world where we have so much information that's coming in, social media, self-help books, YouTube videos, podcasts, in your experience, and then obviously with the clients that you coach, how do we essentially filter through this amount of information that's coming through? And then how do we choose what to apply?
So there's lots of different questions, and let's see if we can break it up a little bit. probably, I mean, by the way, the industry you're in, Steve, and I'm a professional coach doing this for 30 years. I've seen the industries. We've been in so many, from the airline industry, telecommunications. You specifically are probably in one of the toughest fields there is. Congratulations, sir.
Thank you. Thank you very
And I
much, man.
really mean this because there is very limited barriers to be able to get involved. If you get it, as a matter of fact, coaching is one of those really hard difficulties now. After 30 years of doing this, everybody's rushed into this without a lot of knowledge or experience. What you bring to the table, brother, and I really want to thank you for your tribe and your group, is that I have a sense of reading people really well. And I knew when I met you, and that's a fun story, of course, that there was something that the universe had put together, because my body was really injured over a lot of workouts and a lot of martial arts and a lot of physical, really heavy activity, from football to every single physical sport you could think of. I've been involved in some way, and it took an impact on my body. And I really needed your help to stop working out like a big meathead and keep getting bigger with muscles. And I needed to start really trimming down and really started getting my flexibility back. Now, I knew that intuitively, right? I knew that I should be doing that. But my programming was, no, Dave, you're supposed to get in the gym and throw on these big weights. And that was my life. That's programming. And, I have programming just like you do. And I had to fight that with you, to be honest with you. And the reason it worked was because I trust in your knowledge base, of your experience of that knowledge base, is what I really should say, was the thing that allowed me to trust you to be my guide, my teacher, so that I could get through this journey and continue on where we are now. Because when I first met you, I was around 228 pounds kind of thing. I'm 5'8" with heels on, kind of stuff, 5'9" with heels on.
That's a different question for another day.
So that height and weight, and by the way, I had purposely gotten to that weight because I really wanted to bulk up to be able to bench press my maximum weight, which I achieved, but I couldn't lose the weight after that. My flexibility and the inflammation in my joints was just crushing me. So I really had to take a different alternative, which meant I needed to find a mindset, a set of programming through a teacher that really was superior to my own to be able to help me get here. And I trusted myself enough to trust you on that journey. So there's the real first answer, is that, you can only trust someone as much as you trust yourself. So the very first person you should be working on, and throughout all this work we're talking about, is you. Because if you don't work on you, you're going to limit yourself in some way of seeing what's really clear out there and how things align to you. So going back to the specifics around this industry, and why it's so tough, limited barriers. Just because you have knowledge doesn't mean you can be a great physical trainer, but a lot of people in the field have lots of great knowledge. And there are a lot of them that really do experience that. They apply this to their body, but it's really few groups of people. And I'll put you in that realm, that really are the elite people that really, they focus on the flexibility, the intuitiveness of being able to use functionality in your body and still have it look aesthetically pleasing. Of course, that's one of my goals, but I want it to be functional. And that's really where you came into play, that I didn't know how to get there. So having you guide me, I really thank you for that.
Absolutely. It's been fun. We've had our tug of war, tit and tat, just going back and forth.
Just say the least.
Yeah, that's right. So in case anybody's ever curious about, like, what is your training session like, Steve? Well, I don't know. Maybe we'll film between David
Probably
and I.
shouldn't attend one of ours right away. I mean, that's not for the novice.
Yeah, that's true. You're going to have to go fully prepared for battle on that one. I want to go ahead and touch on something, because I think this kind of bleeds into what we're talking about. And I think I've mentioned this before, but this book called The Mountain Is You, and it's about self-sabotage, because it can get into this application of the application of knowledge. So we're taking stuff in, and then because it's almost like we're taking dopamine hits off of taking in a whole bunch of knowledge, and we feel good and we puff ourselves up because I learned something, and now I feel like I'm more righteous than the other person because I've learned all this stuff. But then it's that sabotage part where we hinder ourselves from applying it. So how do we get to the point of, I've taken something in, and like you said, like, you have to almost trust intuitively to get through it. But if we know that there's something on the other side that's better for us, but we don't we stop ourselves essentially. How do we build that trust essentially to get to the application side? Because that can be some of the stuff that is actually preventing us from getting to the next step.
So 2 parts of the question again. The very first, the beginning of the conveyor belt of all the things you and I are going to talk about is programming. Programming is the key to be able to shift things over the long term. And without that change of that programming, that long-term behavioral shift isn't possible. Sorry to say that. I know that sounds like an absolute, but I have not seen that demonstrated. Now, there are 5 different ways to be able to change that programming. So let's just focus on one, number 3, which is practice. And that's one of the things we focus on here at Samurai Success by practicing something over and over again. There's an old adage that says practice makes perfect. Right. And I will tell you that that has not been my experience, but my experience has been practice makes permanent. So you want to be really careful about what you practice over and over again, because that will get into this practice will start getting into that 10,000 hours everybody's heard about. And all of a sudden you start establishing habits and behaviors and commitments and belief systems. And then it's become part of your behavioral identity. That's a hard thing to shift because that's part of your programming. Well, when you're in the practice phase, the best thing to be able to do, the best tool, the mindset, skill set, tool set to really use here is the difference between an evaluator and the true student. Now, both are masters. One's a master teacher and the other one is a master student. So whenever I go into a place of practice where I really know that I consciously want to change my programming, but my programming still hasn't changed, I'm in the process of changing that. I have to consider my role distinctions, which is very clearly in the book, about how to be able to understand role distinctions, your identity process. But my role that I go into those new learning curves that I know that I want to change things. And again, my programming is fighting it just like it's fighting you. That self-sabotage is always there. But how I get through it, how I keep the practice going is that I don't allow myself to get into the evaluator position. I don't allow myself to become the teacher.
Interesting.
Because as soon as I do that, brother, my programming kicks back in and I go exactly against everything I want to learn differently to change the programming that's taking me to the place where I don't want to go. So as opposed to the evaluator or teacher, I stay in the student role. That's why your choice of teachers is so important, everybody. Because when you're staying as a student, remember, you're going to be taking their stuff on. So make sure you choose wisely with your teachers, any area that you're going to be focusing on. Because when you start practicing, you're going to be taking on their belief systems, and that's going to have to really make sure that that aligns with who you say you are.
You know what I find really interesting about that, David, is there was a itinerant speaker I remember hearing once who was talking about, I can't remember the exact time frame, but he was talking about how all these MBA grads were moving into the workforce, especially into the business world. And the problem is that they were getting caught with essentially broad term corruption, embezzlement, insider trading, all this other stuff. And we get mad at and he brought up a really good point, and this is exactly what you were just saying, is that he was pointing out that these MBA grads who were making it into CEO, high level executive positions, and were getting caught for these corruption crimes, but nobody has gone after the professors who essentially instilled these, whether it's ethics or what their beliefs or whatever you have, but they had to learn it from somewhere that they carried from school into the workplace. And then they're the ones who are getting corrupted, and nobody is going upstream to see where this is coming from. And I think that's a fantastic point of being able to be wise enough to select who we're pulling information from. To the point, going back to the programming, this is probably more of a coaching point for me that I'm going to ask for. But in your terms of how you're saying the programming that runs us, the question I have is, how do we make the how do we make the invisible visible? How do we start finding these, essentially, this is going to be really nerdy talk, subroutines and programs that are running in the background that are controlling us? How do we bring that up to the surface so that we can start essentially reprogramming, so we don't self-sabotage, or so we don't end up doing the things that we don't want to do.
So let's go back to your first frame of reference, because I can't seem to let it go. I will tell you that, and I don't know if your point was to be able to say, should we make the people responsible? Should we make our teachers? Should we make our podcasters? Should we make our mentors? Should we make our coaches responsible for your behaviors? And by the way, we've just seen this in our court system where the parents of the killed multiple people, I believe in a school or something like this, that parent was then charged with murder. The father, I believe, was. And I don't know a lot of the details, so forgive me on this, but take a look at that. So we're definitely moving in an interesting direction. That's a scary place to start thinking about. And I know there's a lot of emotions around this. I'm not looking to get into that, but I will tell you that free speech is a really important part of our country that we've got to protect. And when you start deciding who's allowed to teach things like this, that responsibility should be mine as an individual. I should be choosing that person. And the reason I'm choosing that person is because I know who I am. Now, Dave, when you're teens, in your 20s, in your 30s, maybe you don't know who you are. Well, that's why it should be so much more important to get people into seminars or classes, to be able to get people to know who they are a lot sooner in their cycle, as opposed to they're going to meet people like this in their lives. They're going to be corruptible. So how you take that information in, what you do with it, is really going to have an impact later on. Practice makes permanent. For example, if in the university system, it's become very clear now, but when I was at the university system, I saw so many of classmates that were, getting test scores and getting answers and doing all these things. And how does that not translate into the business thing where I've been cheating to be able to get these good grades? Now I'm going to
Right.
be cheating to be able to do that, right? Who's looking over my shoulder? Who's checking me out? What's going on here? So practice makes permanent. That's what happens with that. No judgment with it either way, but it does eventually come up to a place. How do we really get to programming change? I think is the next question. Of the
Yeah.
5 different ways to be able to change that, being able to understand NLP and Psych K, which is ways to be able to change your programming. Number 2 is being in love with something, right? When you're in love, you're in the honeymoon effect, and actually changes your whole frequency of your brain. And it actually opens up the theta-based frequency of being able to relearn things. So when you're in love with stuff, you notice how 2 people get together, they're in love, and love is blind, well, that's reprogramming, right? Kind of stuff. And it's essential for our society and our mating and everything else that goes along. Because without that, we'd just be like, stand off all the whole time. So there's that part of that. Number 3, of course, is practice. Getting into this idea of the reprogramming into what we do, which is called the I Am Studio. This is where you actually go through a year-long process of actually really changing things with intention. And I find that we use all those different things, including number 4, hypnosis, but this is auto-suggestion we use. So you're actually suggesting to yourself all these new changes you're doing, as opposed to someone outside of you making those changes for you. And that's really what differentiates us in the IM work in this um, industry, if you will, that really does make the kind of dramatic changes that we're seeing with it. Having your own voice, having your own words, you downloaded this information, if you will, personally for you, and then taking a look at those 10 categories of balance of every single area, from financial, physical, mental, emotional, spiritual, friendships, family, those kind of things. Who are you in each one of those areas, by the way, is already pre-programmed in your subconscious by the time you're 7 years old. So you're living that life. So if you've ever felt like you're actually living someone else's life, there's a good chance you are. You're probably living society's life, or your dad, mom's life, the church's life. Someone else has got in there and programmed that. Now you have an opportunity with Swords of Illumination to really make the changes that are intentional for you and where you want to go. That's a cool thing.
Yeah, that's pretty cool. I don't think I've ever heard or met anybody it's essentially been able to kind of distill that down before. And this is just, when you said this, I don't know why this popped into my head, but how our conversations go.
Yes.
But I
I'm
think
a
it's
little
just
scared
really
right now, to be honest, Steve.
the I just have this image in my head, because going back to how you said love is one of those things that essentially reprograms us. And I can't really imagine a man standing in front of his beloved and, without any real emotion, just looking at her and saying, I really appreciate the way that your love is reprogramming my brain, like in some kind of unromantic way of, thank you for bringing my brain out of whatever program it was running, you know? So it's just, I don't know. That was just a really weird thing that came to my head when you said that.
Which is
Gentlemen, what?
great remembrance that your programming is a unconscious, subconscious idea, and having it come to your conscious level of your brain is a kind of an interesting conversation because most of us don't have those conversations. But I think it does answer the next part of your question is, how do we get feedback, that we want to change something? How do we take it from the unconscious, pull it into the conscious so that I can make
Yes.
changes around it? I think that was your original question, right? Well, that's a brilliant
Yes.
question because you're getting feedback all the time. There's a universal feedback mechanism. And interestingly enough, when things happen, it goes from an unconscious thing and there's a trigger event. Something happens, someone says something event happens in your life, and it triggers this place from unconscious to a consciousness around the event itself, the activity, the behavior. And you're like, oh, that behavior is tied to my programming. Okay, so now I see the behavior and I see its response or reaction from somebody else. I didn't like that. So now I'm getting feedback that says, hey, I'm now at a moment, a critical juncture of, do I want to do something with that? And most of the time you get to a place of awareness, which is the first step in change everybody talks about. But it goes from unconscious behavior to conscious behavior to awareness. And at that awareness point, there's this really cool mechanism called rationalization that just pulls you right back into the unconscious. Oh no, I'm good with that. I don't care what anybody else thinks about this. I don't care how they reacted. And you just rationalize it right back into the unconscious state. But if you move into awareness and it doesn't allow you to rationalize it, there is this thing that becomes this idea of, you get so upset about it that it becomes a place of absolute suffering. That's the word. And that's when it finally gets to a place where you just can't tolerate it anymore. You can't rationalize it anymore. It keeps showing up. And by the way, the universe is relentless. It loves you this much. Or you can think about it, it hates you this much, whichever way you want to go. But my belief is it's giving me feedback that says, hey, you really do want to make this change. This is in alignment with who you are. And that behavior, that's what that suffering is really about. It's telling you something behaviorally is out of alignment with who you say you are. And it's an opportunity to make that change. So there's this natural mechanism in the feedback of the universe that's constantly giving this. But we're so powerful, Steve, that we can just overcome that. We can just, shove it down like we were talking about yesterday. Just take it.
Yeah, push it way down.
And eventually it's going to affect your health. It's going to affect your joints. It's going to affect your body in a way that's another feedback mechanism. And you can only tolerate that for so long until it just takes your life.
Yeah, but what I want to do, obviously, so we can respect your time as well. Let's go ahead and just shift gears because I believe there's something that you'd like to share with us. And I know we just off camera, you showed me just a little bit of it, and I'd love to be able to jump into that and have you run us through that.
So as we were talking yesterday, it came to my realization that a lot of the things we teach here at Samurai Success are very unique. They're completely obvious to us because we've been doing it for so long. But when you bring it to the audience, people are like, whoa, I never thought about it that way. And I thought maybe I'd bring that to your tribe today, your circle, because this is a really powerful model. It really speaks against what we're doing as a society of wanting to make things much more convenient for our children, much more, getting away from, them to feel any pressure or any of those things about, want to keep them from harm. And we want to be able to deal with bullies. Listen, I'm an advocate for all those things because of all the times I was bullied. I get the notion of wanting to change that, but let's take a look at it from a different perspective. And what I mean by that is something we call the differential triangle. And when I'm talking to people, they're always using adjectives to express how they like or adore someone, right? Their characteristics they're talking about. And there's all these adjectives that people want to share that are really about explaining or expressing what they admire about somebody else. And so in the differential triangle, it starts to give you an idea, if you can see that, okay?
Yep, there we go.
And in the differential triangle, when I'm talking to people, they start using these adjectives. As a matter of fact, one of the really first good the adjectives that people use about expressing other people or themselves is that there's something that's good about them. And the next one is, above that is excellent. And then I'm like, oh, okay, what's above excellent? And then some people would say great. And then great becomes extraordinary. Extraordinary can become someone who is a star. Someone who is a star can become a superstar. Well, what's above superstar? Well, elite. And by the way, there's nothing above elite, is there? Well, yes, there's legendary. And what's above,
Wait for it.
exactly what's above legendary? Everybody talks about it.
Now the GOAT.
Of course. So what's interesting about it is we just talk like, we're just having a wonderful conversation about things like this is the way it is. But what drives this in the marketplace, man? What causes people to discern between these different levels when it comes to seeing this in other people or seeing this in themselves? And the extraordinary thing that I've learned over my lifetime is that the thing that makes this different, someone who is really good than someone who is elite or legendary, the one characteristic that separates all these things is this word.
Sure. Interesting. I
Now,
love that.
step back and think about that. Why do we admire professional athletes? I mean, could you imagine having a job where there's so many cameras on you? There's some type of referee studying your everything, looking for mistakes. Well, maybe you actually work at a place like this, so sorry. But now you're on a court of all these audience members who have differing opinions about wanting you to lose, wanting you to win. And then you have an entire extraordinary group of talking heads that are going to talk about your performance before, during, and after that game and never forget any of those things.
Yeah.
Could you imagine dealing with that pressure?
Not on a daily basis. I couldn't do it. Maybe like a short time span. Yes, maybe. But
okay,
yeah,
exactly. But the ones that deal with that pressure over extended periods of times is how they get to these levels. When you don't deal with pressure really good, you stay down here or less than this, because pressure and the ability to deal with that is what we value in the marketplace.
Interesting.
So
yeah, that's unique.
Here's what's interesting about this. Let's imagine you're in this box down here. You as a symbol this, and I'm in the symbol this. And what this box is, taking the Willy Wonka glass elevator ride, if you will, right? This glass elevator is your identity statement. And it's a glass and compartmentalized elevator. And as you go up this thing, your ability to deal with pressure without this glass breaking, your ability to withstand what would be called integrity, because there's pressure coming from the outside or inside, and it's pressurizing this glass thing, your identity, and it's pushing in on it, pushing out of it. And if that folds, that's your level of integrity that you get to. And so if you get to a place of greatness and all of a sudden this thing can't go any further in the extraordinary because dealing with that level of pressure is just not there, that's where your methodology stops. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So the idea here is to build a strong enough identity to be able to deal with all of these levels. And that's what your identity statement is. That's what Swords Illumination is all about, is about creating this identity so strong that you can deal with any of these levels of pressure.
So, well, there's a couple, actually probably just one main point and then something that I want to bring up. The first one is, like I said at the little bit off camera, but you know how I love a good triangle, so that's brilliant. Number
all about
two.
you, baby. It's all about you. You know that.
Okay, good. So we're all on the same page.
Same page.
The other part, just before you brought up shared your screen with us, or I just love this so much. I wish there was a way for me to like give you a heart reaction to this, because you said that this is something that helps speak against what is kind of being taught in society as far as, wanting to protect kids and then the convenience and comfort. And one of the principles, like long time ago, I remember when forming Renegade Training, was that I myself started realizing, I'm actually more capable of doing more difficult things if I allow, in this case, pressure, or allow more challenging circumstances to come upon me, because that will, like that elevator, allows me to elevate to the next level. And it is a combative deal of where our culture and society is in, where we almost want to protect so much, but then that glass elevator becomes very fragile.
Well said, sir.
And so, right. And so now we can't actually get to the next level because we're like, the shattered glass from Willy Wonka's elevator has now sprayed into my face, and I don't want to go up to the next level because it was really uncomfortable. So the question is then how do we, because you can't, to build that resilience around that glass box, there's no way to necessarily, we can't experience that all at once because it would just collapse in on ourselves. So how do we progress up that to each level without it collapsing in on us?
So the non-collapsing part is how you strengthen that is through your programming. Your programming is the glass box. Included in there are all the 12 swords of illumination, which have to do with your identity statement, how you do role distinctions, your outcome thinking role, those, everything we've talked about so far in the books is that these all things make up your programming. Now, you don't need to use all 12 of them, but if you start fortifying 2, 3, 4 of them, especially your identity statement, that glass box allows you to move up that pressure thing pretty effortlessly. And let's really, Dave, maybe the word pressure doesn't make sense to the audience. Maybe it makes sense this. At what point do you get triggered in a conversation? That's your pressure point. Whatever you're getting hooked by or pressured by, where all of a sudden someone has said something or some event externally has said something and it shifts or you react and respond to it in a way that you don't really want to react and respond to. That's your trigger point. That's your pressure point. Now, how far you go into that is about how much this collapses, right? Because people are testing us all the time. Men do this, especially, right or wrong. We are constantly hazing each other to be able to find out if, and here's the weird part about the psychology about that is I want to know if we have to go to war, or do I want you in the foxhole next to me? That's it.
You tolerate that. Yeah.
I'm telling you, man, because men think this is the way we're programmed, is to be the protector. Right or wrong, I'm just saying this is what we've been designed to do. And because of that programming, we're constantly making sure that the person sitting next to us is going to protect my back so I can protect his front. That's what we do with men. So there's this pressure thing that we're not acknowledging enough. And we're starting to want to solve for it. And it's actually doing a lot of detriment to that. There's a lot of conversations we could have. Well, Dave, should students have to be able to deal with the pressure of someone showing up with an AR-15? Of course not. That's not what we're talking about. But there are pressure situations where if you are not teaching your child how to deal with a bully, they're going to be bullied and that pressure point is going to affect them for the rest of their life. If you know this as an adult, which you do, how do you prepare them for that? Because that's, I believe, I know I'm speaking a little bit out of turn here, but I believe our number one purpose as parents is to be able to prepare people for the real world. Not some imaginary kind of stuff like this. Use your imagination, but use it to be able to enhance what's going on or to change what's going on or to change your experience of what's happening, because that's where the power really comes from.
I was just reading something actually earlier this morning about how a mentor was telling him essentially to, as you prepare for the real world, until I come back to you, you're going to need to essentially strengthen your internal framework, modern day language. From a Christian biblical worldview, it's essentially the Apostle Paul is writing Timothy because he's about to experience a whole bunch of things and he's kind of left on his own. But that's what it came down to, was that he is informing him to make sure to have a inner resolve that can withstand some of these external pressures that are going to be coming against you. Funny enough, within the same sentence or within the same paragraph, he also tells him, but just know that, you can train physically. That's of some good, but just know that you're going to want to train for something a lot larger than just the physical stuff. So I found that actually really fascinating in today's reading. And it applied exactly to that.
We're at a great connection to what we're talking about, that inner source, kind of thing, that inner structure is the glass thing we put on that screen, right? It's really your prayer field, right? It's that box that really is really a circle. But the idea behind it is that dealing with those internal pressures is something you're dealing with. For example, if you've never been subpoenaed for the first time, or when I was subpoenaed into a court system, right, for the very first time, I was like, when bonkers, I was like, what the hell do I do? And of course, I talked to my attorney after freaking out for 2 hours. And, I call my attorney and he starts laughing at me. It's like, Dave, come on. Why did he not feel the pressure that I felt? Why did he not get triggered like I did? I was like, what is happening here? I know this guy. I coach this guy. Why is... And the things that I help him with, I don't freak out about. It was because he's
Mhm.
dealt with it so much. He's put himself in that position. He's seen this subpoena thing. He's seen it thousands of times in his lifetime. He doesn't get triggered by that even because he knows what to do. If you're not put in that pressure situation, you don't know what to do. And so you don't know how to act, or you don't know how to resolve the situation. You're going to get frustrated and it's going to start collapsing that field. So if you start noticing there are things and themes in our lives as human beings, then you want to start putting yourself in those positions. If you haven't noticed that we've become a very litigious country, then you probably should take your head outside of the rock, out of the sand, and notice things that are going on, because it has been. What do you know about the law? What do you know about the court systems? Have you ever gone into a court system? By the way, I know this sounds crazy, but I have worked with so many different attorneys over our lifetime, and I've actually attended so many courtrooms that now I go, wow, this is how this game works. This is how this thing is played. This is how this works. And you start realizing the truth is subjective in that place, which is really an interesting dynamic. But once you understand what's going on, then it's a lot easier to prepare for it.
Have you seen? I've only seen, I think it's only 2 episodes, maybe just 1, but on Amazon Prime they have, it's called Jury Duty, and everybody is an actor except for one person.
Great. I love it.
I don't,
No, I
yeah,
haven't
I don't
seen
know
it.
if you have you not. It's pretty funny. There's actually there's like 3 real actors, like people that you would
Right.
recognize, and then there's everybody else is just an actor. And then this one guy, and it's a documentary of what jury duty is like. And so they're going through the jury selection process. But to your point of going into a courtroom, this guy is completely oblivious to what the process is like. And so he's just taking it in. You're going to get a good chuckle out of this. And then same with anybody else who's been through jury duty or has been in a situation similar to yours. But to your point of, you kind of watch his facial expressions, because when some people, as they're going through the jury selection process, they're just saying some outlandish
Yeah.
outlandish things. And so obviously the attorneys are looking at him and like, okay, you're dismissed from jury duty, like that, or the judge
Yeah.
saying ridiculous things. But I think if you guys haven't watched it, watch it, because it's a good chuckle.
Yeah. I will have to do that.
What if you're willing to share the story, because immediately what came to mind, David, is, again, if you're willing to share this, about you being audited.
Yes.
So if you're willing to share a little bit of that story, like how you got, because this was it's essentially exposure therapy is what you gave to yourself.
Yeah. For whatever reason, I've noticed within me, whenever I get afraid of something, I used to get really small and, fade back from it. And I was like, I'm done with that, because a coward lives 1,000 deaths is what I remember. Right. And I was like, because I was going through this process internally of just driving myself insane and crazy, and I couldn't shut off the things. And what I was missing was information and application. So every time I felt like I was afraid of something, then I would attack it. I write it down. I go, okay, I'm going to go find the best damn teacher on the planet, and I'm going to learn more about this, so I don't have the same level of uncertainty with it. And audits, for some reason, with the IRS was a big thing for me. I don't know where I got this. I don't remember my parents ever getting audited, anybody in my family ever getting audited. My family were always business-oriented people. Maybe something along the lines came up with that, but I don't remember a specific event that would place the fear that I had for it. And so what I did, instead of staying fearful, is I hired a group of CPAs that used to work for the IRS, and they actually take our company through an IRS audit every single year. So then I now know that, okay, IRS, if you want to be able to send me that letter that you want to be able to audit the company, we've already done that. And I can go in with a state of abundance as opposed to a place of scarcity.
And how many years? You went like a long
20
time with
years.
this, right?
This has been 20 years we've been doing this. Yeah. It's like, well, Dave, don't you have enough experience? No, I'm going to keep going.
It's almost as though whenever people do the cold plunge, and and they just keep doing it, it's that cold exposure over and over again. You're like, yeah, I'll just keep going, because it's almost become routine. It's been part of your program, to where you just keep doing it almost.
It was an interesting part to your question in the past, was that, this letter, I believe, with John that you were talking about, and the pressures that were about to happen, and be prepared for those kind of things. are four dimensions of training that we really should focus on. And we tend to focus on the physical, right? But there's three other dimensions that we need to train in, which is the emotional dimension, the mental dimension, and the spiritual dimension.
Absolutely.
Those four dimensions all have their individual training needs. And I will tell you, you want to blow up any of those other three, disconnect from spiritual. Always not have a connection for source, the rest of them will blow up immediately on you. So having that connection, that's why church is so important. That's why some kind of rituals in your life of connecting to something bigger than you, the source of your spiritual, whatever you call that is up to you, but still having that connection is so essential for living a purpose-driven life.
1,000%. And that was, a long time ago in the formation of Renegade Training. It was literally just on, I actually have the notebook here, but it was just sketches and then just words and notes of, how does a training program actually work? And with the thought of, I started realizing, because it was really my own journey of going through depression, and then the physical aspect started coming in, but then I started realizing, like, oh well, actually my spiritual side is getting trained at the same time. Then I started realizing, oh, this goes back to a good triangle. If you take out a leg of the triangle, you don't have a triangle, you don't even have a shape. You have something that resembles a shape, but you don't know what it is. And exactly to your point, if you pull out a leg, especially that spiritual leg, you don't really have anything. It's not complete, right? And I think overall our wholeness, the human experience of desiring wholeness is what we're ultimately pursuing. And I think the physical aspect of the physical training is what's just easiest to be able to digest and easy, because we just get the quicker result because we can see it and we can feel it. But the emotional side needs training, the mental side needs training, spiritual side needs training. And to add a little bit of a component to that, and that's why the Renegade logo has a circle around it, is to be able to do it within community, because we just need others in our lives. This isn't a lone wolf superhero kind of deal. Like we need our people around us to help kind of usher us in where we need to go. Well, David, I want to respect your time and getting close to the end. I'd want to give you the final word, and I wanted to also, because time has transpired, I'd be interested to know if anything has changed from your final answer last time of how would you coach, you as an executive coach. Of course, there goes Skaya. What would you coach others? Like, has anything changed? Like, what, after this discussion, what would be the final words that you would like to deliver to the audience?
So if I remember correctly from our last conversation, probably the last thing we talked about was if I found something really profound in this lifetime. So I'm going to share it again and then really talk about how it really applies to the chaos that we're seeing in our world today. For most of my early part of my life, I was really under the impression that I was here to discover who I am. I was here to, like, lift it under a rock. It was hidden there. It was in some kind of treasure chest somewhere, or somebody was going to tell me who I was. And that was a big part of my life, or younger life, I should say. But then I found a truly remarkable person in my life that spoke some true profound wisdom that just shook me to the core of who I am. And it hasn't gone away. So it just stays there. You're not here to discover who you are. You're here to create who you are. And Steve, watching your journey along this has been fascinating and wonderful to watch, because, brother, the pressure you've had to deal with is very different when you're a self-employed person that you are now than when we started where you were an employee. Pressure is different. That's a different mindset, skill set, tool set that goes along with being an employee versus self-employed. And then there's a different mindset, skill set, tool set that goes along with being self-employed to business owner. And then there's a different mindset, skill set, tool set that goes from business owner to investor. All four of those dimensions, different ways of thinking about the world and different approaches to it. The amazing part about this is this identity work fits into every single one of those dimensions. And it's driving you where you want to be able to go. And it's creating your destiny. And it's creating either a life of fulfillment or a life of disappointment. It is in charge. Now that you know that, here's the good news. It's reprogrammable. It was given to you as a gift to make choice, to change this thing called your programming. And there are abilities on the planet to do it, and we help people do that.
Love it. David, thank you again so much for joining on today's episode. Thank you for being a guest for the second time and sharing a great triangle. I'll be sure to make sure I talk that up. And ladies and gentlemen, I'll be sure to check the show notes out. Be sure to check out David's page. Make sure to check out Samurai Success on. I think you guys are you guys also on LinkedIn as well? I want to say I've seen you on LinkedIn.
LinkedIn,
LinkedIn,
yeah,
out on all the social media platforms. Also, if you have started with this episode and you have absolutely no idea what we're talking about, I will link the first episode because that will not make any sense. I'll make sure I'll have the link of Swords of Illumination to have the book, to make sure that you read that book as well, because this is one of those books that you're going to want to read multiple times. It isn't just a one and done kind of deal as well. So anyway, but having said that, David, thank you again so much for joining us. And I know I'll see you in the gym here shortly, like in 24 hours. Guys, ladies and gentlemen, thank you for joining us on another episode of Renegade Radio. As always, this is Coach Steve saying never conform.